Welcome to Chubby Scholar. Throughout history, Vietnam repeatedly faced opponents that were vastly larger in population, territory, and military resources, yet it preserved its independence on multiple occasions. How was that possible? And how powerful were the empires Vietnam defeated? To understand the reality of these historic clashes, let's look beyond mere patriotism and dive into the hard data. Geography placed this small, S-shaped nation at a brutal crossroads, right in the path of expanding global giants. Stretching over 3,260 kilometers of coastline, Vietnam controlled the vital maritime trade routes connecting the Indian and Pacific Oceans. For foreign empires, conquering this land meant controlling the commercial gateway to an entire continent. On paper, the matchups seemed completely impossible, with Vietnam consistently dwarfed in size, wealth, and manpower. Yet history shows that sheer scale is not the only metric of power. Strategy, terrain, and logistics can completely rewrite the outcome of war. Our journey spans over 7 centuries of resistance, examining the rarefied data and primary sources from each conflict. This is not a narrative of easy victories, but a masterclass in asymmetric warfare and survival. We begin in the 13th century with the global superpower of the medieval world, the Mongol Empire. At its peak, it controlled nearly 24 million square kilometers, making it the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Driven by an unmatched equestrian culture and iron discipline, their armies conquered territories stretching from Korea to Eastern Europe. They dismantled entire civilizations, leaving a trail of absolute subjugation in their wake. Before turning towards Southeast Asia, the Mongols had already subdued northern China and Central Asia. Kublai Khan needed a strategic corridor through Vietnam to bypass the southern Song Dynasty and launch a multi-front naval campaign against Champa. In Wu Bai, the 1st Mongol Division crossed the northern border into Dai Viet. Facing an estimated population of over 110 million back in the Yuan heartland, the small Vietnamese kingdom faced an adversary with near limitless resources. Rather than fighting where the Mongols were strongest on open plains, Vietnam avoided direct confrontations, evacuated the capital, and relied on a scorched earth policy. The climax arrived in 1288 along the Bac Dang River, where terrain and tidal cycles were weaponized to trap and destroy the entire Yuan fleet. The destruction of the Yuan fleet effectively ended Kublai Khan's naval ambitions in the region. However, understanding the asymmetric reality of power, Vietnam immediately engaged in pragmatic diplomacy, sending tributary missions to Beijing to secure a lasting peace. A century later, a new giant emerged from China, the Ming Dynasty. Having overthrown their Mongol overlords, the Ming sought to forcefully re-establish absolute Chinese hegemony over all neighboring states. The Ming Dynasty was an economic and demographic powerhouse, ruling over a population of roughly 65 to 80 million people. Their agricultural surplus and massive bureaucracy yielded logistics and wealth that no neighbor could easily match. Militarily, the Ming were at the cutting edge of 15th century technology. They deployed the elite Shenji Camp, a specialized division entirely armed with advanced early gunpowder, muskets, and heavy artillery fire. Seizing upon internal political instability within Vietnam, the Ming Emperor launched a massive force of over One-Sen troops in East Lil. Their objective extended beyond tribute. They aimed for total colonization and cultural assimilation. Vietnam's defensive strategy, which relied heavily on massive, static stone fortresses like the citadel of the Han Dynasty, proved ineffective against the Ming's superior firepower and sheer numbers. Within a year, organized military resistance collapsed, and Vietnam was formally annexed. For 20 years, the land suffered under a brutal occupation, aimed at erasing Vietnamese identity while extracting resources like gold, silver, and precious wood. Primary texts from the era record this as a period of profound, systematic exploitation. Liberation did not emerge from a royal palace, but from right here in the rugged forests of Lam Kinh. In 1418, Lê Loi mobilized a small band of local followers, initiating a guerrilla resistance against a deeply entrenched global superpower. Outgunned and outnumbered, the the rebels turned the dense tropical jungle into their primary defensive shield. They actively neutralized the Ming's artillery advantage by forcing the occupiers into exhausting, small-scale wilderness ambushes. By 1426, the resistance shifted to strategic offenses. At Totong, a significantly smaller Vietnamese force utilized severe weather and swampy terrain to intercept, isolate, and decisively shatter a major Ming reinforcement column. The final blow fell at Chi Lang Pass in 1427. Caught in a narrow valley surrounded by steep, rocky cliffs, the elite Ming cavalry was completely. Through 10 years of grueling warfare, Vietnam reclaimed its sovereignty. The famous Bin Ingo Dai Cao was written to declare to the world that while empires may change, Vietnam's right to govern itself remains eternal. 3 centuries later, Vietnam faced the High Qing era, the absolute zenith of imperial Chinese power. Under the long reign of the Qianlong Emperor, the Qing Empire expanded its borders aggressively across Central Asia. Fueled by agricultural advances, the Qing population exploded to an astonishing 300 million people. This single empire controlled roughly 1/3 of the entire human population on Earth at the time. The military arm of this superpower was the legendary Eight Banners Army. Disciplined, heavily armored, and battle-hardened from continuous northern conquests, they were considered the most formidable military force in Asia. In 1788, a request from an exiled Vietnamese king gave Beijing the perfect excuse to intervene. A massive invasion force of 290,000 Qing troops poured over the border, occupying the northern capital of Thang Long with ease. Facing total destruction, a charismatic commander from the south stepped forward. Proclaiming himself Emperor Quang Trung, he set out to accomplish what many foreign observers believed was a tactical impossibility. In the dead of winter, Quang Trung launched a breathtaking military march. His entire army covered over 600 kilometers of rugged terrain in just 2 weeks, catching the overconfident Qing forces completely by surprise. Striking during the traditional Lunar New Year holiday, the Vietnamese forces used innovative wooden shields wrapped in wet straw to neutralize enemy gunfire, systematically dismantling the fortresses surrounding the capital. The assault was so fierce that panicked Qing troops fled in chaos, causing their own escape bridges to collapse under their weight. In less than a week, one of the largest armies of the High Qing era was completely broken. By the 19th century, industrialization introduced a completely new type of adversary to Vietnam. The French Colonial Empire, driven by the global race for resources, turned its sights toward Indochina. France commanded the second-largest colonial empire in the world, controlling nearly 11.5 million square kilometers of land. Its advanced economy and global network gave it power that extended across multiple continents. The conflict introduced a massive technological gap. Traditional Vietnamese defenses faced modern French steam-powered ironclad warships, long-range heavy artillery, and automated firearms that rendered old tactics obsolete. Following decades of colonial rule and the chaos of World War II, the conflict ignited into total war in 1946. The newly proclaimed Democratic Republic of Vietnam faced a fully rearmed French military determined to reclaim its colony. To counter France's modern military machine, Vietnam relied on a concept known as People's War. Entire populations were mobilized, with hundreds of thousands of civilians volunteering to transport supplies through treacherous mountain paths. The war reached its ultimate climax in 1954 at Dien Bien Phu. French commanders established a massive, heavily fortified valley outpost, believing their superior air power and artillery would draw out and crush the Vietnamese resistance. But the French made a fatal logistical miscalculation. Vietnamese forces dismantled heavy artillery pieces and manually dragged them up impossibly steep, muddy jungle mountains surrounding the valley from positions the French thought unreachable. For 56 grueling days, the valley turned into an intense, bloody siege. Right here on places like Hill Awan, the conflict was decided yard by yard through fierce hand-to-hand combat and relentless underground mining. On May 7, 1954, the French garrison surrendered. This unexpected victory shook the world, marking the very first time in modern history that a Western colonial empire was decisively defeated by a localized resistance movement. Yet peace was short-lived. As the global Cold War intensified, Vietnam was swept into a collision course with the wealthiest and most technologically advanced military superpower in human history, the United States. At the peak of its intervention, the United States deployed over 540,000 troops to Vietnam, backed by an annual military budget of tens of billions of dollars. They commanded absolute air supremacy and possessed a level of firepower the world had never seen before. Beginning in 1965, massive waves of U.S. combat troops landed on the shores of South Vietnam. The American strategy relied heavily on high-tech search and destroy missions, rapid helicopter mobility, and overwhelming technological superiority. To survive this relentless aerial bombardment and technological tracking, Vietnamese fighters adapted in ways that redefined guerrilla warfare. They constructed massive, multi-layered underground tunnel networks, effectively neutralizing the devastating impact of heavy artillery and carpet bombing. Logistics became the true battleground of the war. Despite continuous high-intensity bombardment by B-52 bombers, the Ho Chi Minh Trail remained operational, moving thousands of tons of supplies and troops through rugged mountains and dense jungles every single day. The United States introduced advanced electronics, including acoustic and seismic sensors, designed to detect nocturnal human movement in the jungle. Yet these high-tech systems were consistently bypassed by low-tech human ingenuity and absolute determination. By 1968, the conflict had reached a psychological breaking point. Events on the battlefield, combined with rising American domestic opposition and massive anti-war protests worldwide, made it clear that the war could not be won through military attrition alone. In December 1972, the air war reached its terrifying climax over Hanoi during Operation Linebacker II. For 12 days and nights, the city faced the heaviest bombardment of the entire conflict. Yet its anti-aircraft networks managed to bring down dozens of strategic bombers. The signing of the Paris Peace Accords in January 1973 officially brought an end to direct U.S. military involvement in Vietnam. It marked the withdrawal of the world's most powerful military, leaving a profound impact on global geopolitical history. Just years after the end of decades of conflict, Vietnam was forced into yet another border war in February 1979. This short but highly intense clash served as a stark reminder of the unforgiving geopolitical realities of living at a constant crossroads. When we compiled the data from all these major conflicts across 7 centuries, a striking pattern emerges. On every single occasion, Vietnam faced adversaries that possessed vastly greater populations, wider territories, and vastly superior resources. How is this survival consistently possible? The answer lies in a masterclass of asymmetric strategy, avoiding the enemy's strengths, weaponizing the natural terrain, causing logistical exhaustion, and relying on absolute unity. But history must also be viewed with deep gravity. These victories were never effortless, nor were they guaranteed. They came at an unimaginable human cost, leaving deep scars and a legacy of untold sacrifices across generations. Today, these historical campaigns are studied deeply in military academies worldwide. They serve as timeless academic case studies, demonstrating that absolute resource superiority on paper does not translate directly to victory on the ground. This enduring resilience is rooted in a profound, centuries-old consciousness of sovereignty. It is a fundamental principle that has been passed down through generations, establishing that the right to self-determination is non-negotiable. From the medieval cavalry defenders to the modern guerrilla fighters, the faces changed, but the fundamental spirit remained completely unbroken. It is an enduring chain of determination that defines the very core of national survival. Geography cannot be altered, and living at the historical crossroads of superpowers requires constant vigilance and immense strategic intelligence. Vietnam's history has taught its people that peace is fragile, and sovereignty must always be protected. Today, the battlefields of the past have transformed into bustling international trade ports and thriving modern economies. Vietnam has risen from the ashes of total devastation, turning former adversaries into modern strategic partners. Ultimately, the history of these conflicts does not suggest that one nation was always inherently stronger than another. What it proves is that military might alone can never easily suppress the collective will of a people determined to be free. Thank you for joining us on this documentary journey through history. If you found this data-driven analysis valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe to Chubby Scholar for more deep dives into world history.